Looking back on the week that was and forward to the week ahead. It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Here are your hosts, Brian Drake and Dwain McFarland.
All across the fantasy universe, welcome one and all. It's the show you've been waiting for all offseason long. It's the Fantasy Football Hustle Draft Plan Show, presented, as always, by our good friends at Pro Football Focus. I am Brian Drake, joined as always by my main man, the analytical assassin, just off a podcast with Chris Collinsworth, I hear. Dwain McFarland, how are you, my friend?
I'm good, man. Actually, I just finished up with Ian, but Ian and I were both we recorded with Chris this morning and we did some fantasy talk. So it was really cool getting to do that. 2 articles today, injury updates. Shirley asked if I was taking a nap and I'm like, no, Shirley, I'm not taking a nap, but I need one. I need a nap. Like, I'm taking a nap as soon as this show's over. I'm not lying. I actually have to go in and make sure Travis Etienne is off of everything. I've got to scrub him, Drake, completely from the planet. I got to make sure James Robinson's moved up. And after that happens, I am taking a nap. I hope, my wife works, on Tuesday night. She's a hairstylist, so she's gone. So the kids are going to want food. There's no time for food, Drake. There's time for dad's nap.
I just got back from California. I was gone all weekend. That's why you didn't hear me on SiriusXM this weekend or the show last week. And I'm back. I went to work. We're hustling here home because we know everybody out there is desperate for the information. If you are in a 10-team league, a 12-team league, a 14, I talked to a guy today. He's in a 16-team league, Dwain. And he goes, send me a link to your podcast. I got to know who to draft. I'm like, don't worry, brother. We're going to take care of you. That's what we're going to do here. There's a lot of folks out there who make a lot of noise on the internet. There's a lot of people who get followers for no reason. The reason you're on this show is because Dwain has backed it up with his money and his mouth. He's won big-time cash playing high-stakes fantasy football. He's proven his work, now working full-time for Pro Football Focus. So if we lay it down to you and say, hey, this is why you should take a guy, trust that there's not just a hot take behind it. There's real data. There's real money. There's a real skin in the game. And that's why we're here. First and foremost is to have some fun, to win fantasy football, and to beat our buddies' asses. But before we get going, Dwain, I'm sure you would echo my sentiments. We want to give a shout out to our buddy Mike Tagliere from Fantasy Pros, going through a real rough time with COVID right now. His wife's giving updates on Twitter. I'm sure you guys follow Tags out there. Real good dude. Got to hang out with him in Canton a few years ago. So just keep him in your thoughts and prayers. And he would be jiving with what we're talking about today, which is what to do all throughout your fantasy football draft. And again, folks, thanks to PFF for hooking us up with a discount promo code. It's HUSTLE. Get in there, read Dwayne's rankings. You're going to get 25% off. You're going to want his tiers. You're going to want to know what receivers to draft, what running backs to take. You want Nate Yankees stuff. You want Andrew Erickson stuff. You want Ian Harditz's articles. It's all here. PFF.com. Use promo code HUSTLE. Save 25%. So you got that out of the way. You got our draft board from our good friends over at draftwithredzone.com. Now you go. You sit down at the board. All right, now I need somebody to take. So, Dwain, I'm on the clock. First 2 picks. We know it's McCaffrey. We know it's Dalvin Cook. The draft starts at pick 3. Let's begin.
Yeah. Real quick. Just take one quick, I like to kind of do a quick zoom out. So,
quick zoom out.
Obviously, a big thing, is creating flexibility, throughout your draft. So you want to be able to be flexible. So we'll talk through some different scenarios. But at a high level, from a strategy perspective this season, I'd like to come away in the first 2 rounds with 1 or 2 backs, Drake, and then be willing to kind of take my foot off the accelerator some. There's a couple of backs we'll talk about in the middle rounds that I am willing to take as my RB2. And then there are some that are probably more dead zone candidates, so we can walk through those. I want a tight end if I can in the first 3 rounds. And if not, you're going to have to make a decision if you want one of the next 3, and we'll talk about those as well. If not, after that, there's kind of a break class in case of emergency option. I'm really not liking the tight end punt plays this year. Typically, we have a couple that we feel really good about, but there's just a lot of noise around all of them. I still have a couple, so we'll share those as well. But just big zoom out, again, think flexibility, but in those first few rounds, really what I'm trying to tee up, is I want to have at least one of the backs And you can do it in the first round or the second round. I think second round for me this year, Drake, looking at second round backs, it's as deep as I can remember where the questions don't start as early. If you think about it, last year, all the questions began like once you got to pick 10 in the first round around running backs.
Yeah.
Now this year, there are certain questions with backs, but you can get to about the middle of the second round before you kind of have to, make a tough decision. Do I pivot off, of backs if that's what you want to do? So backs do go deeper, which opens up, a little more flexibility. If you want to make sure you're walking away with at least one back in the first 2 rounds, that allows for a strategy of if you want to go Kelsey in the first, if you want to go with Devontae Adams in the first, Tyreek Hill in the first, you can do that. So those are the high level things, and then we'll walk through the rest of the rounds. But again, we always want to be thinking about multiple steps ahead of our opponents. We want to be, as we make one pick, considering what does this mean down the road, and that's where the tiers and all those other things that Brian just talked about will come in super handy for you. They're all up at PFF. I'm refreshing all my tiers this week. My receivers I posted today, so they'll get updated tomorrow. Receivers for today. Running backs will update tomorrow. Tight ends will update on Thursday, and on Friday, quarterbacks will update. So all my tiers will be updated in article form. I'm already updating all the rankings. So with that, Drake, we're on the clock. Pick 3.
Pick 3.
With your first 2 picks, you're taking a running back. With the first 3 picks, I'm taking a running back. Honestly, I'm still going with Kamara here. I know some people advocate for Kelsey, and I'm okay with that. You could advocate for Devontae Adams, and I would also be okay with that. But just the way things shake out, and even in the first 4 picks, I like going with a back or even going with a receiver. And the reason why is in typical leagues, in 10 to 12 person leagues that are not tight end premium, you're getting either Waller or Kittle coming back to you in the second round. And Kittle sometimes then slides around to the third if you're in one of those first 2 picks. So I think it's very easy to go with a running back, come back, set yourself up with either a really good receiver, a really good running back, or a tight end. So I feel like you're keeping all your options open. So for those first 3 picks, I'm going with backs. Kamara would be my third. If you guys track my rankings, you read all my stuff, you know how high I am on Aaron Jones this year. But you don't have to force it right there. In fact, sometimes Aaron Jones, he doesn't now. But back in the day, Aaron Jones, once you start picking in the middle, and even it still will happen if you pick in the late first, you can let Aaron Jones go by and sometimes still get him depending on who else is on the board if you're trying to make sure that you're getting both players. But once you get past, pick 3, where, Kamara is at, Drake, that's where I think the decision factor comes in for folks. So you could take Aaron Jones, and that would be fine. I'm not going with Derrick Henry or Ezekiel Elliott. I like both players, but I don't see this in a PPR format. In a half PPR, I'm still leaning away from them, but you could talk me into it. If you're in a standard Shirley Shapiro league, then I would definitely be taking Henry or Elliott at the pick that I'm talking about. In a PPR, though, I'm passing on them, and here's why. They're both at 1,500 carries basically on their career. We know that's where running backs flatline or they start to go down. And I'm not saying that's going to happen. It's not a guarantee. I'm not saying it's guaranteed to happen with either of those players, but my point being is if I've got a receiver like Devontae Adams, or I've got a tight end like Kelsey, or I've got a receiver like Tyreek Hill, really in a PPR format, how much more upside do Zeke and Derrick Henry really provide me versus those receivers who are less likely to get hurt and they don't have all the touches piled up? So that's my thinking there. So I'm not taking Henry or Elliott there. I'm taking Henry or Elliott towards the end of the first or the latter mid part of the first when they slide to me. That's how I'm gaining my exposure to those 2 players this season. I'm not going to, if somebody really wants to take Henry or Elliott, look, I'm splitting hairs in the first round, to be honest. But I think you need to, because what I want to do is de-risk my portfolio. That's my number one goal in these early picks where I like all of these players. I want to make sure I'm still getting upside, but I'm taking away as much risk as I can. And I think that's what I'm doing by taking, the receivers. So once you get to pick 4, let's say you decide to go ahead and take Aaron Jones. After that, from picks 5, 6, 7, and 8, so now we're in middle position, I'm pivoting over to Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, and then Travis Kelsey. So I'm willing to take all 3 of those players over Henry or Elliott. And then once they're gone, I'm back to Henry and Elliott. You could even put Stephon Diggs in that if you wanted. I personally am switching back to Henry and Elliott, but the reason why is because I don't normally get to pick them get to draft them at those spots. And I'm going to draft, 50 teams, mostly like 40 of them will be best ball, but I'll draft another 10 to 20 redraft teams. And so I'm thinking about my total portfolio. So just keep that in mind. So I want my exposure to those two players to be at a discount to ADP. So from there, once I've done that, so my point being, if you wanted to take the same logic I just applied to Tyreek Hill and to Devontae Adams, I have Stephon Diggs in the same tier as Devontae Adams and Tyreek Hill. So if you're only going to draft one team and your goal, and it's a PPR draft, and your goal is really to set yourself up for the least amount of risk, but still have high upside, and you want to take Diggs over either of those players, I would not argue with that, at all. So we're through the middle of the first round. And then now you're getting into, you're down towards, 12, 11, 10, and 9. You're coming, to the end of the round. So we already talked about Diggs. Once I get past Henry and Elliott, I'm going after Diggs right there. And then once Diggs is gone, it just becomes about Barkley and Eckler. For me, those are the two next picks. But I am taking Diggs ahead of both of those players. They're all right there in the same tier. So if you want to go the other way, you can. I've started a draft with Barkley and then been able to come back around the corner. Or I've started with Aaron Jones there and been able to get Barkley coming back around the corner. Sometimes Barkley slides right now, so I like to let him go. Eckler, not as much. Like if you want Eckler and like he's your target, you kind of have to take him at the end of the first round. He's not slipping around the turn as much as he used to. Back whenever we first started drafting, I say first started drafting, this was even just like, a month ago. But right now I'm pulling up current ADP on Eckler in home leagues. So that's like ESPN, My Fantasy League, places like that are PPR. He's pick 12. Barkley right now, it's still showing is pick 7. If you're playing over someone like the FFPC and a little bit sharper rooms, those are the ones where Barkley's actually making it out of the first round sometimes and sliding back around. And then an underdog, if you're doing best ball, Barkley's definitely sliding out of the first round, back around on the second quite often. So there's no reason to have to reach for Barkley. But I really like Barkley, Drake, at the end of the first, beginning of the second. And here's why. I know he's going to start the season, as someone that's going to be dealing with an injury. He's recovering from an injury. And so they could start him slow. But once you get him back, what player is closer to Kamara, Dalvin Cook, and McCaffrey than what you could get out of Barkley if he's healthy and he's really, fully rolling? And that's what you have to think about, in my opinion. So you may start the season a little bit slow, like in week, 1, 2, 3, start getting going in 4 and 5, but then really be taking off in 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now, if that's not your cup of tea, that's also okay. Because there are a lot of other good players there, Drake. So I'll stop for a second because, you kind of get to be the voice of the drafter and ask me the questions and jump in. Because we just covered quite a bit of ground there just for the first round, early, mid, and late position and kind of how I'm thinking about it. And then we'll walk people through the second round, and I'm going to tie all my thoughts back to what I just said around the first round and how it sets up.
So when someone hears, hey, I'm looking to take Devontae Adams or a Tyreek Hill over Derrick Henry, people shouldn't freak out. I know everyone goes like, oh my God, Derrick Henry, but he's like this big back and the rushing title and blah, blah, blah. Devontae Adams on a per game basis, folks, outscored Derrick Henry by 5 fantasy points a game, and Tyreek Hill beat him by a full point. So it's not like you're not losing anything. You're not, in terms of points, you're actually increasing the amount of points that your team could be scoring because you're taking one of these guys. Let me spin it how a casual fan might think. All right, I know Barkley's got some injury issues. Tyreek Hill's got this hamstring thing going on. Stephon Diggs is a little nicked up right now. How much does preseason injury news play into, hey, I want to be safe. I don't need to hit a home run with my first round pick, but I can't get a 0. I got to get somebody who's going to be there and be consistent for me week in and week out. Do those plays fall into that category for you, or are you still trying to, I don't want to play hero ball here with a guy who I think might only play 5 games.
Yeah. So it depends on the injury news, right? Of the guys that you just named, I'm not that concerned. There'll be some players we're going to talk about here in a bit that I'm more concerned about, like DeAndre Swift. There's different levels. And so for Diggs, I'm not super concerned right now based off of everything I've read. Tyreek Hill, I'm not super concerned. Hill, you could argue, right? He battles some of this every year. And so you could have to deal with it. So the fact that it's starting soon, if that's enough to push you off of Tyreek Hill in favor of, say you want to draft, Derrick Henry or Ezekiel Elliott, it's not the end of the world. Like, these are all really good players. I'm just giving you in a vacuum, well, not in a vacuum. I'm actually thinking ahead, but I'm just giving you the way I'm thinking about it, but they're all really close. The key is, as you listen to this and you're thinking about the way your draft's going to go, is whichever move you make, the point is that you're plotting multiple steps ahead. So if you take a receiver in the first round, the thing you need to be thinking about, how long am I going to be willing to wait at running back? What am I going to do if multiple other drafters in my draft go 0 RB and we're all on the same plan? How do I notice that? And do I need to pivot? You've got to be thinking about, okay, once I get to the later rounds, if I start with only one running back, or let's say I start 0 RB, how does that change my strategy? When do I need to throw ADP out the window and actually start being more aggressive with certain maybe handcuff plays and things like that? So we'll try to layer in all those things as we go. But to your question, Drake, at this point in the first round, these are all like really small tiebreakers, in my opinion. So if you are a huge Ezekiel Elliott fan, you love the Cowboys, and you're only getting to draft one team and you want to own Zeke and not Tyreek Hill, I don't think it's going to be the end of the world either way. I just think Zeke comes with a slightly higher risk profile for the season than what Tyreek Hill comes with. And we're not able to really predict these injuries, right? So it could go the complete opposite. And Tyreek Hill, I mean, receivers get hurt too. They just don't get hurt at the same rate. And so I'm trying to factor all those things in as I'm thinking about a first round pick.
All right. I don't want to get too crazy off course here with this, so we'll just ask the question and get the answer. How much does this change your strategy in, let's say you're in a Superflex league where you can start 2 quarterbacks? People always want to know, do I take the sure thing running back receiver in round 1, or Dwain, should I take a quarterback? What is your answer to somebody if they're in a 2 quarterback or Superflex league?
Yeah, I mean, if I've drafted multiple Superflex leagues this season, and my first, I want Mahomes, I want Murray, I want Allen, I want one of those 3. I want Lamar Jackson. I really want one of those 4 in the first round. So if you go look at my rankings right now, I have Superflex rankings up at Pro Football Focus. So it's a very different thing than what we're talking about right here. In fact, like, we could do a whole show on Superflex, but it dramatically changes, the whole way you're going to approach your draft. So for me, Patrick Mahomes is the number 1 overall pick. Because I think McCaffrey carries a higher risk profile, and they're both elite players. And the easiest way to think about, once you're playing Superflex, the reason quarterback people wait is because there's only 12 starters in a typical league. I mean, most people know that. This is not news breaking to them. But as soon as you go to Superflex, well, there's 24. So it's just simple supply and demand. And if you want to get a lot of points, out of your, Superflex position and your starting quarterback, well, you're going to take them both earlier. And then there's just the simple fact that if you wait too long, you're going to be without you want at least 1 stud quarterback in a Superflex league. I prefer to have 2 studs if I can, because quarterbacks get hurt less than running backs. And so I'm fine. Last year in Scott Fish Bowl, that's how I started, was Patrick Mahomes, and came back with Kyler Murray. You saw my team. Like, I had holes all in my team, and that team made it to the final 100 teams in Scott Fish Bowl off of Patrick Mahomes and Kyler Murray.
I just wanted to throw that out there because I know there's folks, especially in our chat room, who are asking about that. And if you're in a bigger league, 14, 16 teams, just know you just got to kind of extrapolate things a little bit. When we say, hey, now we're turning into the second round, we're talking 12-team leagues. That's kind of the world that we live in here on the show. All right, so let's move now into the second round. Okay, we're at that back half of the first round. We're teams, 9, 10, 11, 12. We've probably, at that point, let's say we took a running back. Okay, now we're into round 2. What do we do?
Yeah, so if at the back end, there's really 2 things you were looking at. Most likely is you were looking at either taking, one of the running backs of Eckler, Barkley, that type, right? Or you had drafted Stephon Diggs. Kelsey may have slid to you, so that could be an option, but most likely Kelsey's gone. And you're also not going to take Waller or Kittle there. I'm not. And a tight end premium, that changes everything. Now Waller and Kittle could completely be in play. Waller will go in the first round of a tight end premium league, and typically Kittle can go in the early second. So that changes the dynamics as well. So scoring is major, but in a typical PPR type league, let's say you started with Barkley and you're coming back around, in that second round. So for me, I have a pretty short list here of players that I want. I either want Calvin Ridley. I love him too. I want Joe Mixon. And honestly, those are my top two. Like, I really want one of those two players. And so here's the thing. Joe Mixon grades out in my, so the way I do my tiers, I've got a tier 1 of players, but there's a 1A and a 1B. And so Mixon is my last running back in my top tier. So he's in my top 9 running backs. I don't care really for him. It doesn't matter if it's PPR, whether it's half PPR or whether it's standard, because he's going to get all the work. He's going to get spelled a little bit, probably by Evans on third downs. But overall, everything I've read from listening to the beat reporters, Andrew Erickson even asked the Bengals beat reporter about it this weekend on SiriusXM. What's going on with Mixon? Is he going to have the every down role? And all indications are yes. So you're going to get a back that's in an offense that should improve as the year goes. I'm a little worried about the Bengals out of the gate, right, with Burrow, but that's not enough to stop me from taking a back that I think is going to get, all the work. So you're going to hear Mixon's name over and over. I'm going to take Calvin Ridley over him in a full point PPR. If it's a half point or a standard, I'm taking Mixon over Calvin Ridley at the beginning of the second round, unless you're drafting like 50 teams, and then you can. You're going to be able to get Mixon in all types of different prices. But if you've got 1 or 2 drafts, like Mixon's a priority, for me this season. So that's if you start off with Barkley or you start off with Eckler. Now you're coming back, and let's say you have Mixon. The cool thing I like about it, Drake, is, and this is why I like to think forward, like from a position. It's good going both ways, but like I like to be able to. So from the back end of the draft, coming back to you in the third round, you're going to be staring at DeAndre Swift, Chris Carson, Darrell Henderson, David Montgomery, Miles Sanders, J.K. Dobbins. Like, I have questions about all those players. And if I have a chance to own Mixon as my RB2 and not have to worry about that tier of running backs, I like that. Now, I actually do like Darrell Henderson. I do like Chris Carson, but I really like the receivers that go in that range too, Drake. And so, and you're not guaranteed that the player you want is coming back to you. So at the end of the first round, I really do like coming away with the 2 backs. But if Ridley's there, I'm definitely pounding, the draft button on Ridley, and then we'll talk people through what's happening at the third round pick. So go ahead.
I'm looking at a little ADP here, like Fantasy Pros and their PPR. Ridley's going at like 19, Football Guys Players Championship, a little sharper. He's 16. So if you're on that back half hook of round 1 to 2 and you're following Dwain's strategy, there's a good chance Ridley's going to be there for you based off ADP and how he's going to fall in the cheat sheets for folks. Same thing with Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon's ADP is around pick 20.
Yep.
So if you want to get him, with pick, we'll call it 14, 15, 16, he's going to be there for you.
Yeah. So just real quick, I like Mixon over Jonathan Taylor. I like Jonathan Taylor's talent. And I love it. And if you want to make a bet on Jonathan Taylor's talent, I think that's fine. You can go ahead. But we know he's not going to have the every down role. And it's not like Mixon is a bad player. Like, this is a player that everyone loved just 2 years ago, but people got off of him. Why? Because he hasn't had the every down role and he got hurt. Well, players are injured until they're not, number one. Number two, Mixon now has the every down role. So if you want to talk about a player that has an upside of catching 75 passes and also getting 300 carries, it's Joe Mixon, right? Not Jonathan Taylor. And at that rate, Jonathan Taylor, as much as we love him, he's got to be far more efficient than Joe Mixon. And I think Joe Mixon can be a lot more efficient than what people give him credit for. So one of the criteria I used for making these tiers is whenever you look at a player and how explosive they are after normalizing for down and distance, time of the game, number of players in the box, all those sort of things. So you level the playing field, because it's a lot easier to get a 10-yard run, right, when it's 3rd down and 17 and you run a draw play, than it is whenever it's 3rd down, and 4, or it's 3rd down and 3, 3rd down and 2, or 1st down and 10 even. On downs where defenses are more likely to be at least expecting run or leaning towards run, it's harder to run the ball. And so once you leveled the field for all of those things, Joe Mixon actually ranked out as a B. So if I basically took everybody and then I put them, I put a percentile to everybody. So I had, and then I just made it simple for everybody, an A, B, C, D, right, or an F as far as the grade goes. And so Mixon graded out as a B, which actually was tied with Saquon Barkley, which was tied with Aaron Jones. So of all the players I have in my top tier, Mixon's actually, from a standpoint of creating carries of over 10 yards or more, despite being in a worse offense with a bad offensive line, he's actually produced well.
Look at you, breaking down stuff, giving people letter grades as they head back to school. It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. It's the Draft Plan Show. We've got a ton of folks out there checking us out. Welcome in if this is your first foray into the hustle. I'm Brian Drake. Follow me on Twitter at Drake Fantasy. He's Dwain McFarland, brand new PFF full-time analyst at Dwain McFarland on Twitter. We're going round by round here, talking about what to do in your fantasy football draft. We're into the second round now, moving into the midway point. So if you've drafted in the middle, we're talking now you're about picks 5, 6, 7, 8. In the first round, Dwain gave you his prediction of what you should do. Now, Dwain, we're into the second round. So let's say, okay, we took a receiver there in the first round. We went and we pulled off Devontae Adams, or we took Stephon Diggs. Now we're back in round 2. What are we looking to do?
Yeah, and so this is why I love the option of also taking one of those receivers or Kelsey in the first round, is because you already talked about the ADP. Mm-hmm. Typically, Joe Mixon's available here.
Yeah.
So it's like now you get to start off with an elite receiver. You get to come back with a running back I still have graded in my top tier, of running backs. It's really technically tier 2 of my backs. And you're sitting in great shape, especially if you start with Kelsey. You've got 2 of the hardest positions to get. You've got Kelsey and you've now got a back. Like when that happens, Drake, like I feel warm and fuzzy. I feel good. I feel like, you know what? Nobody can stop me. Like it's pretty much open. I don't have to worry about chasing a tight end later. I at least have one anchor back. And I know I'm not going to panic in the middle rounds, because we're going to talk about some backs here in the later rounds that we really want you guys to target. And I'm actually going to be just fine if all I do between that, after that second pick, if all I do is take receivers, if I've started with a tight end and a back. Now, I could let a quarterback could sneak in there because a certain value gets to me, and I'm okay with that. I could let that happen. A certain back may fall far enough that I'm going to go ahead or I've got 4 other players going 0 RB or something like that. And so I may need to make a pivot. But overall, I feel really good, Drake. If I've got a back, I've got a tight end. So let's say you did the opposite. Let's say, Dwain, I really am not comfortable drafting a receiver in the first round. Let's say you decided to go with Zeke. Well, coming back in the second round, the reason why I like this strategy a little bit less is because technically at that point, like you're reaching a little bit for Waller. You're reaching a little bit for Kittle the way I have them ranked. But at the same time, from a roster construction standpoint, it would be okay. You're going to feel the same way. You've got Zeke, and now you've got Waller. You're in really good shape. My problem is I don't like passing Metcalf and a couple of the other receivers, just that I think do really have a big ceiling if they just pop off, versus what I think we get from Waller or Kittle. And Kittle's the real value. He's the one that people wanted to take over Kelsey last year, and now nobody wants him until, you're in the late second round or the third round's over. So there's multiple ways, again, that you can approach it. If you started with receiver, you can come back with, Mixon. If you started with tight end, you can come back with Mixon. And there's other guys that are going there. So if you don't get Mixon and what you really want is a foundation of a player you think that's going to get, a ton of touches, Najee Harris is the consolation prize in the second round. I know people are worried about his offensive line, all those things, but man, I'm kind of encouraged by what I'm seeing so far. I really think that Canada is going to help, this offense. They're going to line up under center more. I expect them to run the ball more than what we saw last year, using a lot of motion, a lot of play action. The receivers are the components that I'm a little more worried about in Pittsburgh, because I think the offense is changing. But I think this is a good thing as it plays out for Najee Harris, which is kind of funny, Drake, because he's a rookie running back that's going to get all the carries. And it's typically the thing that we're most excited about in life. And for whatever reason, like, he hasn't caught fire. It's like he's just hanging around second round, a mid-second to late second. So Najee Harris is another player that I feel great about in that spot. Now, everybody that listens to this show knows how much I love Nick Chubb. And I really do. Nick Chubb, I think, is the best running back, like as far as being a runner goes in the NFL. Grades back that up, film backs that up. Like all the experts I listen to, whether it's a data person, whether it's a film person, everyone thinks that Nick Chubb is a great running back. The problem is in a PPR format, you're just not going to get the catches. Last year, he was in 2% of the games he and Kareem Hunt played together. He only saw 2% of the 2-minute offense. That's not enough. That's not enough. That's really bad. That means basically you never get to be out there when games are close and it's in a shootout at the end, which is when we want our players on the field. And he doesn't even really get targeted that often on first and second down. So that's just a hindrance for Chubb. Now, if you were in a standard league, if you're in a standard Shirley league, then it's okay. You can move Nick Chubb up your board. In fact, I would take him before the middle of the second round. And Nick Chubb in a league without receptions, he moves up right there at the end of the first round. Really, I like him right after the turn in the early second round. I love Nick Chubb. So again, we're mainly talking PPR. If you're in a half PPR, he moves up a little bit for me, but I still prefer Najee Harris and Joe Mixon to him in that scenario. So,
all right. So now, if you're one of those folks who drafted the beginning of the draft, and this is where I'm leaning because in the big draft that I care about with all my buddies I'm a commissioner of, I have the 3rd overall pick. I'm still not sure who I'm taking at 3 overall. Let's assume it's going to be a running back. So let's assume I've got Elvin Kamara. So now you're back in that wheelhouse. I'm looking at your rankings, Dwayne. And in that wheelhouse, I'm looking at, do I want to go receiver? Justin Jefferson, A.J. Brown, Kittle and Waller could be hanging out there. And you've got this clump of running backs in your rankings 23 through 25. Chubb, Antonio Gibson, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. You're going to be coming around on the hook for another pick pretty quickly. Does that change what you do here in round 2 and someone you're going to reach for?
Yeah, so I think once you get down to the early position, so now you're talking like pick
1, 2, 3, 4.
24, 23, 22, 21, right?
Yep.
Those are the picks we're talking about here. And so once you get into that range, I want to look at the board, number one. I want to do 2 things. I started with a running back, most likely. I really want to make sure I get one of those tight ends, period. And then I want one of the receivers. So I really read the board and I look to see, okay, what has happened? The other thing is sometimes, man, Joe Mixon slides to me there. And I just have to, and at that point, if I've got Kamara and then I take Mixon too, again, it's like, it's still happy land because it's like, okay, I'm good at running back. I don't have to force anything. I can just take value at running back. And it gives me an opportunity to really take a swing at a Pitts, take a swing at a Hawkinson later, which I like being able to do with some of my builds. Again, needless to say, if Mixon's there, you're taking him. Najee Harris is also an option there. But these receivers are really top of mind. It's Hopkins, Metcalf, Jefferson, and A.J. Brown at the end of that second round. So you've got to look at your board. If let's say Waller just went and now it's your pick, but you see that, Metcalf, Jefferson, and Brown are still there, well, then I'm probably going to go ahead and take, one of the tight ends and then come back and get whichever receiver they leave me. If it's a situation where both tight ends are there and let's say only Jefferson and Brown are available at receiver, then I'm probably going to go ahead and take one of the receivers. And it all depends on how good you feel about Terry McLaurin, CeeDee Lamb, Keenan Allen, Allen Robinson, because those are your next players in the receiver tier. I will say the drop-off is bigger at tight end because you're going to drop down to Hawkinson, Pitts, and Andrews in your next tier. And Hawkinson and Pitts could push to be, they could push to make the worthy tight ends this year a bigger group than just the top 3. They could make it a 4-player conversation. And so one of them could definitely do that, but you're not going to take them there. So again, this is thinking steps ahead. You got to read what's off the board. You're looking at the players, behind you. Most likely the players behind you, if you're sitting at 3, they drafted a running back, they drafted McCaffrey, and they drafted, Dalvin Cook. So I personally like making sure that I have one of the tight ends there. But if a back like Mixon gets to me, I'll take him because typically when it gets to me right there, Brian, there's 3 or 4 receivers that I like. And so I'll usually let them go by. Now, sometimes it'll burn me, especially if you're at pick 3, they could all 4 go off the board right there. So it could definitely happen, but you're playing percentages. If you can get one of the tight ends, you go ahead and do it. And then most likely one of those receivers comes back. My consolation prize in the third round, if those top receivers we talked about went, then I'm going with either McLaurin or CeeDee Lamb when it comes back. So a little bit of news on the CeeDee Lamb front. What had me concerned about CeeDee Lamb was that he had only played really in the slot last year. We hadn't heard any indication that that was going to change this season. So even if a team plays a ton of 11 personnel, which is 3 wide receivers, which the Cowboys will do, it's still a limiting factor because anytime they get ahead in a game and they want to go with 12 personnel or they just want to mix it up and use 12 personnel, more one game, that hurts a player like CeeDee Lamb. But what happened this last weekend, Drake, is phenomenal news for CeeDee Lamb lovers. And it's that when they went to 12 personnel, which is 2 wide receivers instead of 3, it was not CeeDee Lamb coming off the field. It was Michael Gallup. So that does 2 things for CeeDee Lamb. One, it means he has a chance to be on the field for about 90% of the pass plays that the Cowboys run, which is great. Number 2, it also, I think, opens up room for him for more targets per route because as we know from Hayden Winks, whenever you're in a 2 wide receiver set, your yards per route run is more than a receiver in a 3 wide receiver set. So he picks that up. And really, number 3, I expect that to help his average depth of target because what it shows me is they're willing to let Lamb win outside this year. And they're willing to let him push the field vertically because that's not really Amari's game. Amari's more the underneath, the quick digs, the drags, the slants. He's a really good route technician. Amari's really good at those things. And he's a good run after the catch player. And he's decent deep, but he's not an elite deep threat, right? That's really the missing component of Amari Cooper's game, if you ask me. And he's still functional there. That's just not his absolute strength. And so I think they're going to let Lamb work deep more as well. So those are all positive things. He's going to be on the field more. He's going to get to kick inside the slot and get great matchups whenever they are in 3 wide receiver. Whenever they're in 2 wide receiver, there's 1 less target left for him to contend with, and then he's going to get deeper targets. So these are all really good things for Lamb. And so now that's opened up. Before, what I had really graded out as being his realistic ceiling is now his median. Because if he's going to have this role, now his realistic ceiling is different, right? Because based on what I think he's going to get to do and how many routes and snaps and all that stuff he's going to have, there's a bigger ceiling. And he doesn't have to just depend on efficiency, but if he hits his efficiency, he could work his way into now being a top 8, top 7 receiver and a player that next year when we're drafting, even if Michael Gallup was re-signed, we would be thinking, wow, we want to own this player in the first round.
CeeDee Lamb, remember, was playing with, high school crossing guards at quarterback for most of last year and finished as wide receiver 22, averaging more than 13.5 points per game. So imagine, as I always like to say a candlelight of prayer, Dak can get and stay healthy. Yeah, it's going to be a big year for CeeDee Lamb. And if you're on Twitter, you already know that. So, Dwain, we're through, let's call it 28 picks or so. Okay. We've just hit the 2-3 turn. We're coming back through. We've already kind of wiped out your first 3 tiers of wide receiver at this point. With the 10 top receivers on your board are most likely going to be gone at this point as we start to move into the middle of round 3. A lot of folks out there starting to ask about a player that comes up in tier 5, and that's Mike Evans, but we'll get to him. So now we're moving into that middle part of the round, okay? And, you probably went running back, middle of the second round. Now we grabbed a receiver. Now we're coming into round 3. Are we playing best available? Who sticks out on the board to you? Is it a Keenan Allen? Is it a DeAndre Swift, the J.K. Dobbins? We're getting near that dead zone that people like to talk about at running back. Right.
So, McLaurin, Lamb, and Allen and Robinson, I want any one of those players. So they're going to be the next names to peel off the board after the others that we've talked about. So, and when I say others, it's like once you get to A.J. Brown being gone and you get to Antonio Gibson, Clyde Edwards-Helaire are both gone. So those players are all gone. The top tight ends are gone. Then the next grouping is really McLaurin, Lamb, Allen, Robinson. And I would put Antonio Gibson and Clyde Edwards-Helaire in that group. So those are the 6 players we really haven't talked about. as much besides Lamb. And I really love McLaurin this year as well. I think he's got a ceiling that he's played so well in his first 2 years. He's shown, that he can be the alpha on his team, that he can still demand targets. He can work every level of the field. Now you get Ryan Fitzpatrick. I think there's a lot of upside still with Terry McLaurin, and it's a really strong floor. McLaurin's one of these receivers, Drake, that one of these years he's going to pop for that huge efficiency year because he catches 3 bombs of over 50 yards, and that pads everything else, and it's going to shoot him up rankings, and he's going to finish, in the top 8-9 receivers. Like, that's totally within, his range of outcomes. I have him ranked as my number 9 receiver right now. So I love Terry McLaurin, but once they're gone, you kind of reach an interesting spot, okay? Because you're, and this is where it really does get interesting from a draft perspective. So at running back, you're looking at DeAndre Swift, you're looking at Chris Carson. Darrell Henderson is typically a 4th round pick, but I see him sneaking into the 3rd round sometimes. David Montgomery, Miles Sanders, those guys all have a range of going anywhere from the mid-3rd to the late 4th, depending on what people like. They can move around a bit. I'll give you guys the ADPs just real quick, based on my fantasy league and ESPN. So Swift is a 31, which is going to drop with this news around is growing. Chris Carson's 35. Henderson, it says 50. I don't trust it. I haven't seen Henderson go that late in about a week and a half now. But it could have just been the drafts I'm in. David Montgomery's going around pick 31, and then you got Miles Sanders. This thing says 37. And again, I mostly draft in it's nothing against home league, but sharper drafts. So these guys don't go as early. So it's weird when I look at them, but I wanted to make sure we used them for the show because a lot of folks are drafting in home leagues.
Yep.
And so for me, that's where it gets really tricky. Every one of those players has questions. I really like Swift, and I actually like this growing injury news because I'm hoping what it does, Drake, is it pushes him down to the end of the 4th or pushes him down to the 5th round. And a player that I know they're just going to rest until he's ready, whether that be week 2, whether that be week 3, that's okay. As long as I'm getting a young player that I think, has upside that I want to bet on in the 4th round. Because right now, with the injury, it makes it really, really tough, to take him in the 3rd round. But you also have a lot of receivers sitting here at this range. And so you've got Robert Woods, you've got Amari Cooper, you've got Mike Evans, Tyler Lockett, Chris Godwin, Cooper Kupp, all these guys.
Those are appealing guys. I'll be honest. I don't want to take, Chris Carson or, who else are we talking about? J.K. Dobbins when I could take Robert Woods or Mike Evans. I'd rather have the receiver here.
Yeah. So I do too. And that's why I like, you got to be comfortable. If you can get 2 backs because it works out in the first 2 rounds, that's great, but you don't want to force it. But you want to come away from the 1st round with at least 1 anchor back because you don't want to feel forced to take any of these other backs. I just don't feel every one of these has questions, right? Darrell Henderson's already hurt. Darrell Henderson has never been able to handle a full workload. He is the one that I was really targeting from this tier if I went 0 RB, because I felt like he carried the biggest upside in an explosive offense like the Rams. But that's when I was getting him in the 4th round. If he's creeping into the 3rd, that makes it tougher. David Montgomery graded out as one of the least explosive players in the league. I mean, he was at the very bottom left-hand of the chart. Like every way you ran it, like Darrell Henderson, David Montgomery could barely get his dot like on the page. So he's basically a sloth wearing a football jersey. And they signed Damian Williams. Tariq Cohen eventually is going to be healthy. I'm not feeling it on David Montgomery. I have some ownership, and I watch. This will be so funny. He's going to destroy the whole league this year, Drake. Just watch. And then Miles Sanders, you can do the Miles Sanders breakdown better than I can, but it looks like they're probably going to use 3 backs. They're not only talking about it, but that continues to be what they do in practice. It also continues to be, but their games are tougher to trust because they're mix matching starters. So like the Eagles, I don't put as much stock in what I've seen in the preseason, especially running back, because you have different players playing and different players not playing, but they're all concerning. Whereas what you just said, Woods, Cooper, Evans, Lockett, Godwin, Kupp, none of them are going to be target hogs, but they all play in good offenses with good quarterbacks, and they're proven. And we're not talking about players that are 32 years old. These players are all still on the right side of 30. Mike Evans last year, when finally all the receivers for the Bucs were healthy down the stretch, because he was hurt last year out of the gate, had a hamstring injury in week 1 that it happened right before the season. It took him a while to get back from. Then he hurt his ankle. But over that last 8 games when he was finally healthy and they had everyone else there, I mean, he had 22% of the team's targets. And I know some people say, oh, well, that's just a small sample size, or you shouldn't cut the data that way. Look, there's certain reasons, like you want to look at data from like cross sections. And so for me, looking at when they finally had all the receivers healthy and the offense was clicking, that's a good way to look at it. So, but even if Evans ends up in a tie with Godwin, right, and Brown's just slightly lower, I feel so good about Tom Brady this year. Like, I feel fine with Evans, you know, in the 3rd round. He's a player that I can start every single week. Tyler Lockett, I feel the same way about. I know he had some huge spike weeks last year, but if you've listened to the show, you know how much I love Shane Waldron, what I think it's going to do for the offense. I feel great about Lockett. Chris Godwin, a player that last year, Drake, we had to tell people to calm down on because they were taking him over DeAndre Hopkins at the end of the 2nd. And we talked about the way the offense would be a little more balanced with Brady. But now this is too far. Now people have punted him all the way down, and he's going in the middle of the 4th round. Like, he should be, you know, an early 4th round, mid 4th round pick. But it's like people almost are begrudgingly taking Chris Godwin, you know, so he's a value and still a very young player. And then you have Cooper Kupp. And here's the reason I like that tier. I like grabbing one of those receivers because coming back after that round in the 3rd, Drake, now in the 4th and 5th, you're really targeting some of these younger receivers that have proven some, but not everything, and they're more about the upside. So I like having one of these other receivers already on my team. And typically, you know, that may be your 2nd receiver for a lot of you whenever you're drafting there. So in the mid and late 3rd round, I'm definitely leaning into those receivers. If I were to take a back, like you were to pin me down and say you have to take one back of the tier that you just mentioned. I hope you never pin me down, by the way, Drake. But
we have to meet in person for that to happen.
We do. Chris Carson would be the one I would take. It's just because I feel really good about the Seahawks offense. You're probably going to deal with being worried about him starting a couple of games. He's not going to handle all the passing work. But I think Chris Carson legit carries a 10, 14 touchdown type year. I think he has that kind of range of outcomes on his touchdowns. And I think he could easily be 1,400 yards rushing. So even if he only catches 40 balls, if he were to do that, he's basically, you know, a cheaper version of what you're getting of Jonathan Taylor in the 2nd round. So if I did happen to approach the first 2 rounds and I went tight end receiver or receiver tight end, and I wanted to make sure I just at least had one back and I didn't want to kick the can down the road any further, then Chris Carson would be the name in the mid to late 3rd or even the early 4th.
Let me throw another name at you, especially off the news of the day. Travis Etienne, foot injury. He's going to be done for the season. That kicks back open the door for James Robinson, who many of you scooped up off waiver wires last year and carried him to, I believe, a RB7 finish last year, RB8. Now, Dwain, he is a guy who ran for over 1,000 yards. We know he can catch the ball out of the backfield, has only Carlos Hyde at this moment as competition right now. In that kind of feels like the range if James Robinson is back in business as the lead dog in Jacksonville. Like, that's kind of where I'm going to slot him in with that Myles Gaskin, Miles Sanders crew, end of the 3rd, early 4th. Am I off base here or where?
No, I think that's where I would put him. That's the tier he goes in. So I had bumped him up this morning based on the news that at that point we knew it was Liz Frank, but we didn't know how long Etienne was going to be out. So I haven't updated it since, then because I've been, riding it in pods. But yes, I've already marked it on my tier though, and I'm glad you brought it up. So yes, Robinson would fit, in that group. And I think you could easily make an argument that after Carson goes, that he would be the next one that you would want because he's still a young player. We saw him do it last year with a bad offensive line. He overcame that. Carlos Hyde should not be a threat in the receiving game. I think Carlos Hyde is more likely to spell him maybe every 3rd or 4th series and truly act like more of a backup running back. Right. I don't think Carlos Hyde is going to get 40% of the work. I think he's going to get more like 30% of the work, which means the rest goes to James Robinson. And I think that's something you can say about him that you probably are more concerned about with Montgomery, Sanders, Henderson. So I think from that perspective, I think it's a really good call, by you. And that's where Robinson belongs now. He's going to be a 4th round pick.
Yeah. So let's turn the corner here into the 4th round. Now this is kind of where draft boards get blown up. So, we're kind of going by ADP of who we think should be there, who we want to take in these spots. But we know in your leagues, it could get crazy. You got, your drunk uncle comes in and he takes Patrick Mahomes in the second round and it starts getting crazy. So you notice, folks, we have not taken any quarterbacks yet in these drafts. The average home league guy now, Dwain, it's fourth round. He's getting itchy. Are you going to tell him keep waiting? Or if you've got Tyreek, if you got Kelsey, are you going to take Mahomes? Or are you going to say, all right, it's fourth round. Keep waiting, folks. Let's hang out for a while. Let's keep ticking off the value at running back and wide receiver.
Yeah, I'm going to keep waiting. Typically in a home league, Mahomes won't make it this far. Mm-hmm. So he doesn't make it that far in sharp drafts. If Mahomes falls all the way into the fourth round, it's like, okay, it's kind of hard to not want to take him. The problem is, I think Kyler Murray has a legit upside of 4,200 yards passing and 1,000 yards rushing, and you can get him a round to 2 rounds later. We love Lamar Jackson. We love Josh Allen. They all go a round to 2 rounds later. So right now, no, I am still, and my general rule on quarterback this year is I'm waiting till the late 5th. Really what I'm preferring is if one of those quarterbacks I just named slide into the 6th in a 12-person draft, then I'll pull the trigger. If I'm in an 8-team draft, it's more like 7th round. But in a 12-team draft, once you get to the 6th round, Alexa can't connect to my Wi-Fi.
If Alexa comes and asks a question about Clyde Edwards-Helaire, we'll know. We've really.
Yeah, she said don't draft Patrick Mahomes too early. Is what she said. If you guys didn't hear, but I'm waiting until the 6th round, and then if one slides to me at value, and when I say one of them, again, I'm talking about Kyler Murray, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, because Mahomes is typically gone. Right. So that's what I'm talking about in the 6th round. Dak, if he makes it to the 7th. And then if you've read my centerpiece, or if you've read my quarterback strategy for 2021, I have 3 centerpiece players: Russell Wilson, Tom Brady, and Jalen Hurts. Now I talk about some other guys like Trey Lance and some other things in there as well, but those are really the quarterbacks I'm targeting the most. So we'll talk about them more when we get there, but it is a really good question. And I haven't mentioned quarterbacks for a reason, because I'm not taking them yet to this point. But what I will say, if you're now going in, to the 4th round, in the early part of the fourth, you're going to have all those receivers we just talked about again. So you're going to be able to get 2 of those, or you're going to be able to take, if you want to take Chris Carson in one of those, you can do that. If you want to take, Robinson in one of those based on the way that your roster's set up, you can really do that. But I'm pretty much hammering the receivers here, and then I'm going to continue doing it. The one option you have is if you're picking at the end of the 1st round, it's the hardest spot this year to draft a tight end from, if you're really trying to get one, because Kelsey doesn't usually make it. We already talked about it. Darren Waller and Kittle, you feel it's too early, right? Because of the backs and stuff that you can still get. So then now here you are again. You're at the end of the 3rd round, beginning of the 4th, and you're sitting there and you're looking at it. You're like, well, I got Hawkinson, Pitts, and I got Andrews in my next tier. But I think Hawkinson and Pitts are the 2 that are most likely to be like knocking on the door of that 1st tier if I had to put money on it. Andrews has just got volume challenges because of his offense. So you have a question to answer to yourself. And here's the way I frame it. Like if you're willing to, let's say in the 3rd round, you took Mike Evans, and in the 4th round, you're the type of player that you're like, you know what, I'm taking T. Higgins here because I'm a badass and I like taking young players with upside. Okay, great.
You catch the ball.
If you catch the ball. Yeah, it's very scientific. If you're willing to do that, I would say that's when you consider a guy like Pitts. Because if you really are willing to just go upside and you want youth and it's the early 4th and you're going to go ahead and make a small reach on a player, why not go ahead and do it at the position that's hardest to fill? And so I'm just going to throw that out there into the universe. The way I approach the draft, and it is tricky when you're in that slot to get a good tight end, I go ahead and continue with my plan. I take the 2 receivers that we talked about, and I let the ball, I let it fall to me. And what's funny is Hawkinson, if you look at his ADP, it's 60. So he's right on the nose of being available to you at the end of the 5th. And so when it's either I got to take Pitts at the beginning of the 4th or wait on a chance of getting Hawkinson at the end of the 5th, I like waiting on Hawkinson and going ahead and adding another player, another receiver that I feel really good about. That's the way I handle it. But if you want to be aggressive and that's your style, That's would be my challenge to you. If you're willing to take Higgins or you're willing to take Jamar Chase, which he's moving down now for people. And so I'm buying on Jamar Chase on this dip. I actually love it because now he's going in the range of where I wanted to draft him all offseason. But if you're willing to do something like that, just ask yourself about Kyle Pitts and what you think his range of outcomes are. And remember the positional value that he gives you because he's a tight end.
It's the Draft Plan Show, Fantasy Football Hustle. Brian Drake, Dwain McFarland. Folks, if you're getting ready to do your draft, there's still time to get a draft board from our buddies over at draftwithredzone.com. Use our promo code FFHustle, and you're going to get a discount on the board, the stickers, and this sweet championship ring. If you're watching on YouTube and you're a fan of our page, and why wouldn't you be, you're going to get this. Check out how cool that is, huh? Looks like the Eagles Super Bowl ring, the greatest Super Bowl ring ever made. And you're going to get that right there. It's going to have an engraved case. This thing's heavy duty, man. So go over there, draftwithredzone.com, use promo code FFHustle, get yourself a draft board, and help us out. We've sold a bunch of those, man. So I'm really happy the affiliation we have with those guys. It's a good product.
Yeah, they're awesome.
All right. We're cruising along here. We're in, what are we in, round 4 now?
Yeah,
we're in the mid. What we're going to do, we're coming back. Mid-4th. So
again, kind of thinking back to the way you started, what we talked about, if you're following, kind of the plan we've laid out, and you could have pivoted and went with Zeke instead, but let's say that you went with, Adams, Hill, or Kelsey with your first pick, and coming back, you got Mixon. So you've got either an elite tight end and a running back, or you've got an elite wide receiver and a running back. Then you just came back in the third and you took another receiver. So you're either 2 wide receivers and a tight end, or you are one running back. Sorry, you're either 1 running back and 2 receivers, or 1 running back and a tight end and a receiver, and you're sitting balanced. In any one of those scenarios, I'm taking the receivers here. And again, like if you like James Robinson and you want to pull the trigger, and you like Darrell Henderson, you want to pull the trigger, those would be the 2 names that I would be willing to pull on. If you like the backs. But the problem is, like, man, Lockett makes it into this range a lot, Drake. Like he slips around the corner. Chris Godwin makes it into this range a lot. Deontay Johnson is there almost all the time. Now you're getting into that area where you can think about Brandon Ayuk, T. Higgins. So here's another component to it. If I started off my draft with Devontae Adams, Joe Mixon, and let's say I come back with Amari Cooper, Mike Evans, Tyler Lockett, one of those receivers in this round. Now I've taken 2 receivers I feel great about plus a back in this round. Like I'm probably taking Deontay Johnson or Brandon Ayuk, or T. Higgins. You could throw Higgins in there as well. And DJ Moore. And here's why. Like any one of those players, in my opinion, the range of outcomes is that they truly do take off and lead their team. I think with Higgins, what we're seeing is it's taking Jamar Chase longer to get up to speed. So that makes me feel even better about him. Ayuk got the huge pat on the back from the reception perception with Matt Harmon, which is a huge part of the way I think about receivers every year. So him getting the grade he did, being able to get open at all levels of the field, I think is really big for him. And we like Deebo Samuel too. And then there's Deontay Johnson, who also graded really, really well in the reception perception. And we already know that Ben Roethlisberger loves him. And we're also seeing that he's not really leaving the field. I was worried about Deontay because I thought, well, what if he leaves the field in 12? Because I think their offense is changing. They're going to run the ball more. Somebody's going to be the odd man out. Where I'm at on it right now is that it's not going to be Deontay Johnson. But I do think that he's going to have less of the quick, short passing game. I think he's going to be more in the intermediate. He's also going to have to work a little deeper. Claypool's going to be the field stretcher. Juju Smith-Schuster's going to be working underneath. And so I still feel really good about Deontay. And so DJ Moore is the other one. And again, here's the reason why. I mean, look, he's never really had a good quarterback. I'm not saying Sam Darnold's going to be good. But look at what DJ Moore's done with nothing. I mean, he really is a good wide receiver. He just has been unlucky with touchdowns. And he's a young player. Would it surprise you this year if DJ Moore popped off for 140 targets, in that offense and had 1,200 yards and 8 or 9 touchdowns? He's a good player. Like it really could happen. We've already seen him. This is not like drafting Jamar Chase here. This is drafting a player we've already seen be really good in the NFL with bad quarterback play. So there's a lot of different things that could break right for DJ Moore. So the reason I like that tier especially if I've started off and I already have two receivers that I really like. I feel like it's just giving me a little bit more upside. And then I can come back and take another player like that in the next round. And now all of a sudden I've got 4 receivers. So if you're playing, and again, we haven't talked about flex yet, Drake. So if you put flex positions into context here, most leagues play with 1 or 2 flex spots. If you have 2 flex spots, you probably have 2 starting receivers. If you have 1 flex spot, you probably have 3 starting wide receivers. That's pretty typical. And so if you have 4 receivers, you've either filled both of your flex spots with receivers, or you filled your 1 flex spot and your 3 starting receivers. So now you're sitting there and you've got Mixon, you've got your anchor back, and you filled all your starting receivers and your flex spots, because people like think of your flex spots as starting spots. Don't get worried. Oh, well, I drafted my 2 wide receivers. Now I got to go draft a running back, and then I'm going to come back and fill out my flex spots. No, that's the beauty of flex spots. It allows you the flexibility as the drafter to continue to take the players you think give you the best chance to win. Just take the best ones. And so, because when you get done with that round and now all of a sudden you're sitting there with all your flex spots filled out, your starting wide receiver flex spots are filled out, and you've got an anchor running back, man, it may feel kind of weird to you, but you've got a lot of flexibility still, Drake. You could take another receiver and then turn around and go after running backs and tight ends. So just keep that in mind.
It's a passing league, folks, and especially if you're in a full point PPR. If you can get, down in this range, we're talking, we haven't even hit Julio Jones, Odell Beckham, Adam Thielen range, Jerry Jeudy's of the world. Imagine if they're your wide receiver 3 flex, now you're really cooking with some gas. So we'll kind of put a bow on round 4 and we'll kick it into round 5 right now. I know there's a couple of guys based on ADP, Dwain, at the running back position that you like in round 5, and that's Darrell Henderson, Kareem Hunt, and you used to have ETN, but we're going to give him the boot out of there. So it's not a lot of guys in this range that you're looking at in the 5th round for running back. Is this a time where maybe you're going to look and say, well, is Kyler on the board? Is Lamar on the board, or am I still hammering home on wide receiver?
Yeah, I'm still passing quarterbacks unless you've got a weird scoring format. Like I have a friend of mine from where I worked before. His name's Chad, and I was looking at some of his stuff, and like their quarterbacks they get 6 points per touchdown passing. Yeah. It's not a flex, it's not a super flex, but you get more points for passing touchdowns. So
I'm playing a league like that too. It's crazy.
So remember those things. When those things occur, that moves quarterbacks up a little. So if that's your scoring system, then now late 4th, 5th round, I'm definitely looking at the top tier quarterbacks. But in a typical scoring format where it's a point for every 25 yards passing, it's every touchdown is worth 4 points and an interception is -1 point, I'm still waiting past the 5th round. So let's just get something out there. If you don't have your tight end and you're in the 5th round and you really want the upside, now's your time. If Hawkinson or Pitts are available, this is where you use the pick. So let's say you had been at the end of the 1st, things just didn't work out. Kittle and Waller were both there. Let's say you were picking 3rd. So coming back, you were picking 10th. You thought one of them was going to fall back to you, so you passed them. You took A.J. Brown or you took DK Metcalf. Coming back, both tight ends go. And you're like, oh, screw it. I'm going to take CeeDee Lamb. You take CeeDee Lamb coming back to you. So now you're without a tight end. If you want access to Pitts or Hawkinson, you have to do it with one of these 2 picks, your late 4th or your early 5th. Mm-hmm. It's now. They're not coming back to you again. So just keep that in mind. So same thing as you move through the 5th round, regardless of what position you are. We won't talk about it as we go through each position of drafting. But if you want a tight end that has access to top 3 upside and you don't own one yet, this is the round. It's the 5th round.
After this, the wheels start to fall off. It's after this Mark Andrews. Then you're going to wait forever for the Logan Thomas, Noah Fant, Tyler Higbee, Goddard to the world.
Right.
And you could be, with those guys, it's not exactly, week winning upside where it could be with Hawkinson, Pitts, or the big 3.
Yeah. And if you want Pitts, you need to think about it at the end of the 4th. So, and it's okay to do it, because here's the way I look at it. If you're looking at receiver at the end of the 5th, which is most likely what you're doing if you're following our strategy, you're looking at Deontay Johnson is still on the board, Brandon Ayuk still on the board, T. Higgins is still on the board. Heck, DJ Moore could still be on the board. He makes it into the 5th round a lot. Let me pull up ADP real quick. I got it right here, Drake. Let me open this. So right now, ADP on these guys, we're at the end of round 4, pick 48 in a 12-team league. Deontay Johnson's pick 53, Ayuk's 59, T. Higgins 68, Jamar Chase 64, DJ Moore 53. These guys are all in this tier that I have here. So most likely, all those guys are on the board. And if you want Kyle Pitts, again, take him. And you're still going to get one of these. Now, if you're out on Kyle Pitts because you feel you're drafting him at a ceiling, which it can be a valid argument as well, then take the guy that you like the best of this and turn around and take Hawkinson. But if in your mind you think Kyle Pitts does have a higher ceiling than TJ Hawkinson, and there's an argument for that, then take Pitts first and then come back and get Deontay Johnson, Brandon Ayuk, or you could say, Dwayne, you know what? I don't like either one of those tight ends, and I just want to take Deontay Johnson and Brandon Ayuk. And guess what? Okay, that's okay. You could do that too. And you could come back. And since we probably want to hit it every round, Drake, like at some point we'll just kind of say, here's how you handle the rest of your draft. Yeah. Once you get past those and Mark Andrews, now sometimes Andrews does weird things and he'll slide, like he's the one I've seen slide into the 6th. And so who knows, you could get access to Mark Andrews at a deeper discount. But once you get past those guys, the names to remember, you've already said them, Drake, but ADP on Logan Thomas is pick 87. So just keep that in mind. He's a player that's always going to be on the field. He's going to have a better quarterback. If he just does what he did last year, he'll be worth it. And the main reason for it is just not dealing with the headache of Mike Gesicki, who only runs a route on 30% of the plays, Dallas Goedert, who's got to rotate with Ertz, Robert Tonyan, who can't score 27 touchdowns every year, Evan Ingram, who's in a crowded, bad offense. We have a couple of sleeper tight ends that we'll talk about. I don't know what point, Drake, you want to just stop and talk positions and the rest of the draft, probably run through a couple more rounds, but we'll talk about tight end sleepers here in a bit. But again, and I'm not just like this huge Pitts homer, but I am just throwing it out there. If you are a believer in Pitts, like you have to think about your strategy of when you're going to take him and think about what remains on the board at receiver. And most likely you're going to get to a point where if you want Pitts, you got to take him and you're still going to get one of the receivers.
Yeah. This is how I break the tie with Hawkinson and Pitts. All right, look at the two guys. Who's more athletic? Kyle Pitts. And
you're done.
That is serious. But yeah, who's got a better quarterback? Kyle Pitts. Which offense is more than likely leaning on throwing the ball a lot? Kyle Pitts. Is
that one I disagree
probably with, the lead dog in his offense? Sure, but to me, Kyle Pitts is going to be playing wide receiver. To me, he's going to be playing X wide receiver on the outside, and they'll play Hayden Hurst on the inside. And because just look at their roster, they don't have anybody else, and the defense still stinks. So they're going to be in shootouts in a division that's built for shootouts. Oh, by the way, they play indoors. So does Detroit. But just look at the variables there. It all points to me to Kyle Pitts. It's fantasy football. You want to have fun. It's an exciting player. We can't all be robots all the time. Pick Kyle Pitts. Put him in your damn lineup. Have some fun. All right. That's a little tip from your board, Brian.
Have fun, folks.
Yes. That's like we said last year with Kyler Murray. Fantasy is supposed to be fun. He's a fun player. Let's get crazy.
So I think we've kind of hit the 5th. I mean, basically, it's the tier of receivers we just talked about. And it's Kyle Pitts and TJ Hawkinson. That's really your plan. Now, if Darrell Henderson slides into the 5th, these running backs, now that they're sliding a little bit, like they become more appealing. You don't have to get credit. Like DeAndre Swift, if he starts sliding into this range, and I think it's just going to be, he's going to miss 2 weeks of the season, maybe 3 weeks of the season, but then I get to use him down the stretch. And it has to be a PPR format, by the way, for Swift. Half point, go a little later. If it's a standard league, don't bother with it at this point. Just keep, doing what you're doing.
I'm looking at ADP here in round 6, and I got to tell you, Dwayne, I'm not excited about Chase Edmonds, Javonte Williams. We're going back to the well here of, hey, we're hammering wide receiver. Are we now at the spot where we're finally going to say, hey, let's go kick the tires on a quarterback, or do you want to, in the 6th round here, take a shot on Javonte?
Well, once you get to the 6th round, if Kyler Murray, Josh Allen, or Lamar Jackson are there, I'm taking them. So if you go read my quarterback strategy, that's there can be rules that can break it. I'm not taking Javonte Williams over any one of those.
No.
Sorry. And I like Javonte Williams. I really do.
Backup running back.
Right. And look, he could grow his role over the course of the season, but we've also seen backs like this not grow their role over the course of the season. And we've seen backs that are far more washed than what Melvin Gordon's being reported to be, that backs haven't been able to take over. And again, I like Javonte Williams, but if one of those quarterbacks is available, I'm not taking Javonte Williams. Now, if the quarterbacks are gone, and here's my biggest thing with Javonte Williams is I like Trey Sermon better. Mm-hmm. I like the scheme Trey Sermon's playing in. I like the team he's playing on. And I like Mostert, but I think there's a good chance that Mostert ends up being, 2 years ago, Mostert was the 2-minute offense guy. He was the long down and distance guy. This was all under Kyle Shanahan, right? Same coach. So I think there's a good chance. I think the beat reporters look, and they know more than I do. They're close to it. But when I hear them talk about the roles, and even Matt Waldman talked about that this weekend, we were on I came on his pod and we were talking through it. So hearing him say it too made me feel even better about where my head was at with Sermon. But Sermon isn't just, going to be there to play the first half and let Mostert close games. Mostert, I think, is really going to be more the change of pace back. I think they're going to both get carries. I think they can both be viable in fantasy. But I feel like there's a better chance of Mostert ending up being the starting running back, running with things, versus Javonte Williams. And I like the scheme better. I like the offense better. I like the player better. So I like what the draft pick costs better. Having said all that, if you like Javonte Williams, the idea behind the two players is still very similar. You're looking for access to a ceiling at running back because you only have one on your team right now, and you feel really great about receiver. So here's what I'm going to say, and people get hung up on this. Because you draft Javonte Williams or Trey Sermon in the 6th round, let's say those quarterbacks are gone, doesn't mean you have to start them week 1. But it doesn't, just because you can't start them week 1 doesn't mean you can't take them in the 6th round. Again, this is roster construction. It's not just trying to make your best lineup week 1. You're trying to build your best roster for the season. So what you can do is you can take, and if you're a Williams lover, then love Williams here, by the way. Mm-hmm. I have overall Trey Sermon at 74 on my board and Javonte Williams at 75 on my board. The problem for Williams is he's been going like at 60. Trey Sermon's been the player I can get at late 60s, early 70s. So I've been able to get him at the price I want. Now I've reached on Williams a few times because I do like him and I want to have him on some of my rosters. But again, back to roster, the way you're thinking about constructing your roster, let's do middle position, Drake. And let's say 1st round, you took Travis Kelce, you came back, you got Mixon, you went Mike Evans. Then you went ahead and swung on, let's say you took Brandon Ayuk, and then you came back and you got T. Higgins. And so you got 4 receivers. Your flex positions are flush. Running back 1 is flush. Tight end, flush. This is a perfect spot to pick a player like this. And what you do is you take them, and then later in the draft, you're going to grab a James Conner. You're going to grab a Naheem Hines in a PPR, a James White. You're going to get somebody that you can use until these guys go off, or that they're going to be out on the field enough that you can live with the days that they hurt you. What you don't want to do is be putting a player on the field you don't want to be starting a player that's not getting on the field. Then you're just hoping. Then you're just hoping, right? But what you could be willing to do is you just want it to get to the point where they're playing enough that you're not taking donuts and you've got upside each week if they score some touchdowns, that you're okay. Because again, you've built your roster to be strong in a different way. And you're basically saying that your RB2 position is your least valuable position because you're going to address it as the season goes on. You're going to be aggressive in free agency, on the waiver wire, and you're about to stock up on backs, in these coming rounds. So Williams and Sermon, they're in play for both of those rounds, for the 6th round and for the 7th round. Sometimes when they really slide, but typically the 6th round is where you've got to grab them because they're typically gone. Let me open, and again, I got to remember home leagues, man. I don't want to make you guys take things too early, but Sermon right now, his ADP was 100 a week ago. It's up to 91. Javonte's at 65. but I've seen him slide into the 70s though too. So again, this is why I take Sermon because I get him at the price I want. Whereas in the 6th round, I have the flexibility to take a Kyler Murray if I want instead of a Javonte Williams, and I can still get Trey Sermon. The other thing you could do is try to get them both, Drake. And if you want to try to get them both, well, then you need to draft Javonte first, just because you got to play the game. So you got to take Javonte, and then what you're hoping for is Trey Sermon coming back to you. And then you're going to grab some other filler type players here in just a bit.
So what we'll do now is, because we're about an hour, 15 minutes into this little shebang we're doing here. Let's just say, because we're talking running back, we're in about 7th, 8th round here. Let's just say going forward, here's a couple of guys I'm targeting. So 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, boom, 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 boom. There's a guy out there in Damian Harris who I watched him work my Eagles the other night in preseason. I love Damian Harris, and people just sleep on him and wait until Mac Jones takes that job. I think things really open up for Damian Harris because he's not getting vultured at the goal line. So let's just start looking at some running backs here. We'll go position by position, round 8 on, people we want to kind of fill out our roster with.
Yeah, so from round 8 on, Raheem Mostert I like. Myles Gaskin I like, who he's going to be gone before then. Myles Gaskin looked good this last weekend, but what people don't realize is he's still in a full-on 3-way time split. He's still sharing with everyone. Malcolm Brown's still coming on the field. Ahmed's still getting on the field. And guess what? The coaches have been telling us they're going to use all 3. And then they're using all 3 with the starters. This is not for the game. This is while starters are in the game. They're splitting all the snaps, despite Gaskin looking like the better player. So Gaskin will probably be off the board in most drafts before I can get my arms around him. And I'm okay with that. I'm willing to live with that. But as far as Damian Harris goes, I'm fine. Do not reach for him. Right now he's going at pick 86. So Damian Harrison's challenge is the same thing. James White's going to get all the 2-minute work. James White's going to get all the long down and distance work. And then Sony Michel is going to steal every 3rd series from each one of them. Sony Michel is your new Rex Burkhead. And if Sony Michel gets hurt, then Ramondre Stevenson is going to enter the picture and do the same thing to Damian Harris. So I don't see a path to Damian Harris getting more than 40% of the carries. His upside, silver lining, is baked into what you just said, Drake. You need Mac Jones to be the starting quarterback, and you're hoping he can score 10 to 14 rushing touchdowns. The problem is this offense going to be good enough to score that many touchdowns? But having said that, if you took, let's say you grab one of Sermon and you grab one of Williams, Damian Harris is the kind of player that you could still use until you figure out what you have in those 2 players. And if their offense gets hot, he could have some good, touchdown upside.
Yeah,
we'll see the other guys that
backs they keep anyways too. They have Mike Clay did a great breakdown of this earlier today. They've got 6 running backs on the team right now because Brandon.
But they're also the team, but they also are a team that historically has rostered 5, and they'll carry 4. I've seen them carry 5 into game day multiple times because one of them is a special teams player.
Which is
so
Brandon
the Patriots are which will be JJ Taylor probably on this team now. So, I don't know.
Yeah, so maybe Bolden doesn't make it. That's always the rumor is, because they could keep Stevenson, they could keep White, and they're going to cut maybe Michelle, but we don't know. We're not going to project that here.
I mean, they could cut Michelle. They could be just playing Michelle to get him more playing time. I don't think that's the case. I think they're following the pattern of what we've seen with them for 10 years. This is what the Patriots do. They don't want to lean on one back. It's not in their DNA. They don't want to do it. They want to be versatile. And they don't want to have their wagon hitched to one player. So, I'm taking this that even if Michelle's traded, I think Stevenson is going to be a pain in the ass for Harris. So all I'm saying is don't reach on him, but he's still a player that you can like. The players I prefer over Damian Harris because they're going later. So Damian Harris is pick 86. I can get James Conner at 104. I think James Conner has a very similar role to Damian Harris. I think James Conner is going to be down for 40% of the rushing attempts, just like Damian Harris. I think he's going to play in a better offense. I think he's going to get the carries inside the 5. And I think he also deals with a rushing quarterback, just like Damian Harris could be. So I like James Conner at a 20-pick discount to Harris because where Harris is going, I could be drafting Marquez Callaway. I could be drafting Jalen Waddle. I could be drafting Corey Davis. There's a lot of players I could be taking where Damian Harris is going that are not options when I'm taking James Conner. So I like Conner. I also like Jamal Williams to get pick 129. My guess is Jamal Williams scores basically as many points as Damian Harris. So I guess basically what I'm saying is Damian Harris is fine, but I'm fading him at ADP because I think he's marked up like a tad high. If he was going more like pick 95, in that range, pick 100, like he was earlier in the off season, I would be more favorable, to Damian Harris. And then I would lean to him in a tiebreaker because he's younger than these other players. It's just the way that it's shaking out. I don't think he's going to necessarily really outperform them. So if you're using the strategy we've talked about, you've taken one back, you've come back, you've grabbed one of Williams or Sermon. You've now got an upside back on your roster. Let's say you tag a guy like James Conner or Jamal Williams, one of these. You have to prioritize. I'm going to give you 4 names, and you want to walk away with 2 to 3 of them, depending on how big your rosters are. If you're in a league that only plays with, only 14 people on your roster, you can't roster 4 of these. Right. So you got to adjust. I play in leagues where typically you're going to roster 20 players. So I can do this. But I'm going to give you the names. It's AJ Dillon, who you're not going to get because he's going in the 9th round most of the time. And I think he's a bit overpriced compared to Tony Pollard, who goes at pick 128. So remember, Zeke, 1,500 carries. He's hit that mark. It's a good offense. I don't think I need to tell you guys a lot about Tony Pollard. I don't expect him to have a ton of standalone value like some people do, but I still think he's a premier handcuff. Alexander Madison's going at pick 153 in home leagues. So 128 is Pollard, 153 is Madison. Take them both 1 round ahead of where they're going. So if you get both of those guys, or at least one of them, then here are the next 2. Darrington Evans in home leagues going pick 227. If you're in a sharper draft, he's going to go around pick round 14 or 15 in a 12-team league. So I'm talking FFPC, NFFC. That's where Darrington Evans is going. And that's also how I validate like some of the stuff I look at is I know I'm not perfect. I like looking at the really sharp community and where they're drafting players. And I come back and I look at my board. And so Evans, basically, I want to make sure I rank him in a spot where I don't miss him. And then you have Chuba Hubbard, a guy that's going to pick 182 that plays behind Christian McCaffrey. We've already seen what happens when Christian McCaffrey gets hurt with Mike Davis. Now you've got a player that's arguably got younger legs, more upside. So I really like Chuba Hubbard. And so you could miss Pollard and Madison for some reason and still come back and get Evans and Hubbard. And then I'm going to give you one more name, and it really just came onto the scene here in the last 5 days. But it's Tony Jones Jr., not Latavius Murray, who's really going to be the handcuff to Alvin Kamara. And so Tony Jones Jr. is a guy, if you're in a deep league, you could take him with the very last pick in your draft. If you're in my home league with me, you're listening to this podcast, and now you're going to make sure that Dwain does not get him on the waiver wire. So F all of you guys. I'm just going to say that right now. Just kidding. I play with guys that already know about Tony Jones Jr. They think about
most people in your leagues are going to think it's the guy that delivered the pizza. Like Tony Jones.
I think of that or like a lounge singer. And tonight, Tony Jones Jr.
Right. He's like a velvet suit on or something, playing some cool jazz.
So all those players, and those players I just named, I'm prioritizing over Gus Edwards, Lenny Fournette, David Johnson, Philip Lindsay. I want these players on my team with the builds that I have. Now, there's also a tier of players that could come in really handy for you after the James Conner, Jamal Williams, all of that. Don't forget, if you're in PPR, Naheem Hines goes pick 133. James White is 173. J.D. McKissick is 140. Devin Singletary may own all the passing down work for the Bills. He's pick 120. Got one more. Who am I missing? Oh, Gio Bernard's going pick 182. There's a chance Gio Bernard gets all the 2-minute offense. And this is a 65, 70% passing team for the Bucs. There's a range of outcomes for Gio.
Or preseason, yeah.
Yeah, so those guys are really more your Band-Aids, but you want so you want a mix of those. So you took an anchor back, you came back with a high upside back, you came back with somebody you can start in week 1 out of the Connors Williams tier. You come back, you grab a high upside cuff, then you tape on a James White, Naheem Hines, and you come back with another cuff. So you're carrying essentially between 5 and 6 running backs. You've got 3 that can start on week 1, including your anchor. And then you've got 2 to 3 that are your upside. And that's the way I'm approaching running back.
You have a great headline here on your tiers. If you go over to pff.com, use promo code HUSTLE, you're going to save 25% off a subscription. Read all Dwayne's great stuff. And the tier for receivers, as we kind of get into guys you want to take near in the, the end, last few rounds of your draft, and it's called Youth with Upside. I really like this tier here. Starts with Jalen Waddle and it's got Elijah Moore in it. So a couple of AFC East wide receivers you can get with ADPs in the 100s. Marquez Callaway also in that tier. I think he's going to get bumped up. But this is kind of where I like to talk about some guys with Waddle, Moore, Callaway, Hardman, Mooney, Pittman. Just guys I think you can get as your wide receiver 4-5, and a lot of weeks could sneak in maybe as your flex.
Yeah, and that's your plan with these guys. If you've already drafted, say, 5 receivers by this point, you're getting these guys as you're mixing them in as a wide receiver 6, maybe wide receiver 5. Let's say you took a detour and you took James Robinson in the 4th round, and that's fine. Well, these guys become even more important to you. And then you have another tier that is kind of more like if you did wait at receiver for some reason and say running back value just fell to you like crazy in the first 5 rounds. And so you ended up with more running backs. So there's stabilizers in this range as well. Now, Marvin Jones, we'll have to see what's up with his shoulder. I haven't been able to read any news today, but I mean, you got Marvin Jones, you got Jacoby Myers, you got Emmanuel Sanders is going at pick 196. He's going to be the number 2 receivers on the Bills offense. Now his foot has been bothering him. So if he's hurt, that's obviously a problem. Jacoby Myers going pick 198. He has a chance to lead the Patriots in receiving. Marvin Jones going pick 130, easily could be the leading receiver for the Jaguars, which, I'm here to do the Brian Drake show. Brian's been talking about that all offseason. So those are kind of, if you waited on receiver and you need something to help you early in the season, it's those guys. You already hit one of the upside. There's another upside tier just like that. And so Rondell Moore, pick 185. Brian Edwards, pick 213. Terrace Marshall, pick 194. So if you need upside at receiver, like those are the spots for me, and I'll just name them all: Waddle, Elijah Moore, Marquez Callaway, Nicole Hardman, Darnell Mooney, Michael Pittman, Rondell Moore, Henry Ruggs, Brian Edwards, and Terrace Marshall Jr. I'm prioritizing all of those guys if wide receiver is what I'm looking for from round. For Callaway's probably going to end up being, to your point, Drake, 7th, 8th round pick.
Yeah, secret's out. But I think all your home league buddies saw that game last night, and he's going up. Yeah.
So plenty of receivers to look at. If you're playing in super deep, type leagues, you can go check out the rest of my stuff on PFF for receiver. Then we'll jump over to tight end, then we'll come back and we'll close it out, with the quarterback plan, which we talked about a little bit. So if let's say at tight end, so here's the thing. If I get one of Kelsey, Waller, Kittle, Hawkinson, Kyle Pitts, Mark Andrews, Logan Thomas, I'm not drafting a second tight end for the most part, unless I'm in a really deep format or if I'm in a tight end premium league. For the most part, I like carrying one. Now, if there's somebody sitting around waiting super long and you want to snap them off at tight end, you can. But I struggle to say, here's who you should take that you don't want to let someone else get. The guy that's creeping up my board more and more, and he's been a previous favorite of the show, but it's Irv Smith Jr. So last year, he was never getting above the 70% route rate. So this past weekend with the starters, 89% of Kirk Cousins dropbacks, Irv Smith Jr. was in a route. If he does that, he's going to be fine to be in the top 12, and he's got some upside, even though you have Thielen and you've got Jefferson as the top 2 targets there. There's a lot of paths, touchdowns, good matchups, lots of ways that Irv Smith can pay off. And if for some reason Thielen or one of the other guys gets dinged, this could be his year to really break out. So Irv Smith right now, if you look at his ADP, it's 120. If I get past Logan Thomas and I don't have a tight end yet, he's one I'm targeting. He and Higbee. Higbee's at 115. Irv Smith's at 119. Noah Fant, I have in the same tier, but he goes at pick 84. So I'm typically not owning a lot of Noah Fant. I'm out on Dallas Goedert until Zach Ertz is gone. Robert Tonyan's going to have touchdown regression. So that's really where we're at. But there's a couple sleepers at tight end. If you wait, Cole Kmet sneakily running about 90% of the routes in the preseason with the starters. This last game he didn't play. I think it was a hamstring, but the week before he did. And he did that down the stretch at the end of last year. Jimmy Graham was kind of phased out. So we saw what happened at the end of the year again this preseason. So that's making me feel better about Kmet. So if I'm looking to add an upside late tight end, it's Kmet. And then the other name to remember is Gerald Everett. And then if you just totally get locked out, or maybe you take Kmet as an upside play and he was your first tight end and you're just looking for a floor play, Jared Cook is the name. I think Jared Cook is the guy that he's still going to be doing this when he's like 60, Drake. You're like, man, that guy's still athletic, and he's 60 years old and he's still, a tight end running a 4.6. That's going to be Jared Cook. I think Jared Cook's going to be in more routes than he was last year. I expect him to outperform what he did in New Orleans. He's going to get the mismatch looks against linebackers and safeties off of play action. Remember, this ground game is going to be modeled after the San Francisco ground game. So you're going to see a lot of that bleed over into the passing game and the matchups that you get. So I don't expect Cook to be a 20% target person, but I think he could easily be, 15%, which, he had been lower than that, and he could catch you 6-7 touchdowns. So if you really get kicked in the gut at tight end and you need to roster 2, it would be some mix of Cole Kmet and Gerald Everett plus Jared Cook. Jared Cook's the guy you're going to start week 1, and then you're going to play it from there.
Yeah, that you're getting into some territory down here. Like if you're, the Pat Fryermuth saying a prayer, or Juwan Johnson, any of those kind of guys. All right, let's close things out with quarterback. And I know there's a crafty veteran down in Florida that you're a big fan of, and you can kind of build your roster and draft around him. Talk a little bit about this new guy. I got to look his name up. Tom Brody.
I think it's Thom, but anyway, or Thomas. So quarterback plan is pretty simple, guys. And I put this out, I don't know, a week and a half ago. And it's funny. I've seen it get tweeted almost in exact form. So kind of funny. But anyway, if you get to the 6th round.
I've seen that tweet.
If you get to the 6th round, I was kind of like, what the Anyway, if you get to the 6th round and Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Kyler Murray are available, you take them. That doesn't happen very often. So moving on, you get to the 7th round, Dak Prescott's there, you take him. He's fallen down board some. Because he fits in that top tier with those guys. But just because a little bit of worry with the ankle, a little bit of worry with the shoulder, you want to make sure you get the right discount on him. But really who I'm building my quarterback plan around is Russell Wilson. If you've heard us talk about Shane Waldron, you've heard us talk about the tempo of the offense. You've heard us talk about how they're going to solve for the 2 high safeties. He's got 2 really good receivers. They added Eskridge, who's just now come off PUP. They added Gerald Everett. Hopefully one of those guys can also demand enough attention. They're going to see plenty of play action. You're going to get Russ out on boots, all sorts of cool stuff that he hasn't really got to do a ton of, not lately anyway, in the latest version of the Seahawks offense. I think Russ is going to be highly efficient. I think he gives you the rushing floor you're looking for. And I mean, just to be at the end of the day, Drake, Russell Wilson, he's just a guy that finds his way into the top 5 fantasy quarterbacks a lot more often than he doesn't. And so I really like getting Russ when he makes it to me in the 8th round. If Russ does not make it to me in the 8th round, my pick is Tom Brady in the 10th round. Tom Brady, we've already talked about it on the show. Look, basically over the last 8 games when he finally had everybody healthy, he was on pace for 5,000 yards in 16 games. Like, it could be one of those years. And if you guys heard my podcast with Matt, and I spit my coffee and everything out when he gave me his Tom Brady projections, which was like 52 touchdown passes.
Whoa.
But I tell you what, it could be that kind of season for Tom Brady. That's what you're getting. And here's the thing. I hear the argument, well, he had to throw for X number of yards and 40 touchdowns last year to even be, in the top 8 or whatever it was. I don't think he's going to have any problem getting to that number. That's my point. Like that's what I feel like. I feel really strongly that Brady's easily going to hit 40 touchdown passes in 2021, and he's going to hit 5,000 yards. So that's really that's what I'm counting on, is basically being his median projection. Sure, there could be a floor from there. But I feel really good about Brady. And again, a lot of quarterback is around price. You're getting the guy in the 9th to 10th to 11th round. If you're in a home league, Brady is a guy you got to be a little more careful with. So don't get upset when he's gone. Home leagues, Brady, for the last 10 years, has typically gone ahead of what you would think. But he goes at pick 74 there. So I'm not telling you to reach. If Tom Brady goes, then your backup plan is you're saving a pick for Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts is the guy that even before you add one passing attempt, I have him scoring over 100 points just rushing. So doesn't even have to throw a ball yet. and let's say his accuracy is terrible again, which I think he'll improve, but let's say it doesn't even get better than last year, and he has the same accuracy issues, but he gets the rushing. He's still going to be in the top 10 quarterbacks, probably the top 8. The flip side of that is, what if all of a sudden their passing game does start to click? He does improve his accuracy, and all of a sudden he throws for 4,200, 4,400 yards and 30 passing touchdowns. He carries QB1 overall upside. I'm not saying he's going to do it, but it's in his range of outcomes because of his legs. Mm-hmm. So Hurts is a guy that if you miss Brady and you miss Wilson, get aggressive. I get aggressive with him. Once they're gone and they're off the board, now depending on my roster construction, I don't really try to get cute. I don't try to get cute at all. I'm like, all right, 10th round, I'm saving a pick, for Jalen Hurts. If I feel like I got to do it at the end of the 9th, looking at the players that are picking behind me and they don't have a quarterback yet, and let's say I'm picking, at round 9, pick 9, and I look behind me and there's 2 players without a quarterback, and Hurts is the last guy that I really think gives me this upside, I'm taking him. Let's say I miss Hurts though, because I don't want you reaching in the 8th or 7th round for him. Let's say things get wacky, like Brian said. Things can go weird. So Jalen Hurts is gone. Your buddy listens to this podcast. He's out. At that point, if Tannehill or Stafford are still available, you take them, let them basically carry you early in the season, and then you want to come back, you want to tag on one of Trey Lance, who, by the way, is just at this point he's starting to go too high. I don't want Trey Lance in the 10th round. I want Jalen Hurts in the 10th round. And I love Trey Lance. I really do. But I think he has some struggles ahead still. And so it won't surprise me if it's 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks before you even get to use Trey Lance. Could it be week 1? Yes, it could. But think of that. If Trey Lance doesn't play for 6 weeks and you've got to hold him that whole time, that's another aspect to think about, especially if you're in a shallow bench league. I'm not trying to chase you off of him because the upside is certainly there with he and Justin Fields. But the name that I'm going to put out there, and he's probably going to start creeping up now, but I own him more than any other quarterback, is Tua.
I knew you were going to say that.
And it's just looking at the offense. It's again, the steady drumbeat. Going back to the Bloom analogy, we heard it in the offseason that they were going to go more vertical. They signed Will Fuller. Then they go draft Jalen Waddle. We get into minicamp and OTAs. What's it about? Hey, make your mistakes here, throw picks, get the ball down the field. Let's be aggressive. Now we're starting to see it in the preseason. The throws he's making down the seam to Gesicki, he looks really good, and he's not a complete zero in the rushing game. He's not going to give you what Hurts in those guys, but Tua could give you 300 yards rushing and get a couple of rushing touchdowns for you. And I think he has an upside in the passing game that people aren't realizing. This team wants to throw the ball. They've invested nothing in running back. They told you they're going to use a committee of jack of all trades, masters of nothing at all their running back positions. They want to throw the ball. The offensive line is going to be problematic, but Tua needs to own part of that. Quarterbacks own part of their pressure rate. So quarterbacks can help to offset that. So he's got to grow, but that's the player that goes much later than Trey Lance or Justin Fields. He's going to pick 162. Those guys go in the 140s. But I'm seeing Trey Lance and Justin, especially Trey Lance. I see Trey Lance go anywhere from 100 to 120. That's the quarterback play.
Dwain, what if between now and Labor Day, Trey Lance and or Justin Fields is named the starting quarterback for their team? How does that impact? I mean, if you look at that 49ers schedule, it's a joke, all the teams they play this year. And you've seen everybody kind of put out pair him with Kirk Cousins, the schedule is super easy. And let's say tomorrow they say Justin Fields, Trey Lance, starting quarterbacks.
Yeah, you treat them just like Jalen Hurts. That's why I think it's so funny that people like Jalen Hurts carries the same upside that they do. Mm-hmm. He just doesn't have the draft capital in him. But I'm not worried about Joe Flacco. Like the Eagles are either going to sink or swim with Jalen Hurts this year, and they're going to know what they want to do next year. The only way I see Jalen Hurts getting benched is if for some reason, and you and I have talked about this on the show, let's say the Eagles are 5-3. The Cowboys and Giants and Washington, they're doing nothing. They're just piddling around. Everybody's kind of muddled. You either got, a team with 2 wins. Everybody else is like just trying to stay 500.
I like where this is going.
And the Eagles think, you know what? We just got to stop turning the ball over or something like that. And we think we can win this division, not even being that good. Like that's the only scenario I can think of.
Joe Flacco's not going to play unless
that's my thought.
Unless he's hurt or Deshaun Watson's under center, which is probably not going to happen. It's Hurts' team.
So that's my thought. I like Hurts and taking him, knowing that he's going to be there. But to your point, if you find out that either one of those players is the starter, then to me, he belongs in the tier with Hurts. He becomes the other Jalen Hurts.
Makes Hurts a value. Probably those guys, because everyone loves the sexy rookie, it probably pushes Hurts down the board.
It probably will. They'll jump Hurts, and then you'll get Hurts at an even bigger discount.
There you go.
And again, this isn't about being an NFL quarterback. This is about being a fantasy quarterback. And that's not to say Jalen Hurts can't also be an NFL quarterback. Last year, I drafted Josh Allen a ton because I thought he was a great fantasy quarterback, and he turned into a great NFL quarterback. So weird shit happens, Not to say we can just use that to explain everything away, because that's kind of become the thing this year. Is anything's possible. Everything's possible. We don't need to do, basically just take the youngest player. Anything's possible. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of super thoughtful analysis going into young players and upsides. I'm not talking about those folks. I'm talking more like the Twitter conversations that I end up in. Yeah, that's the quarterback plan. That's the draft plan. We've covered a ton of ground. I'm almost out of a voice. I need a nap.
Man, speaking of anything happens, so Dwain and I started this podcast 4 years ago. Dwain today recorded, as we said earlier, a podcast with Chris Collinsworth, the voice of Sunday Night Football. 4 years ago, we were sitting in a basement talking to ourselves about fantasy football. So, folks, just like that, anything can happen. Put the work in your real life, in your personal life, in your fantasy football life. Good things are going to happen. Just be a good person. If we've learned nothing from Twitter this week, it's be a good person. So for Mr. McFarland, I am Brian Drake. Go over to pff.com, use promo code HUSTLE, save 25% off a subscription package. Go to draftwithredzone.com, use our promo code FFHUSTLE. See, it's a different promo code. You can still get a draft board in the ring from those guys. Go to veridianglobal.com if you want a hat, a shirt, a jacket. My wife wore the Hustle hoodie all week in Malibu. People were like, oh my God, that's the coolest shirt I've ever seen. And I was like, yeah, I know. Gave him the website, but you know how it goes. So folks, we appreciate it. He's at Dwain McFarland. I'm at Drake Fantasy. The show is at FF Hustle. We appreciate it. We thank you all so much for being a part of our growing family here. We'll see you next week. Good luck in your drafts this weekend. And remember to never get out hustled. See you, everybody.